We will remember them. I remember then. On Friday morning, September 11, 2026, we will gather in the Church of St. Michael and St. George at 8:30 a.m. to commemorate the 25th anniversary of 9/11, to mourn the loss of those we knew and celebrate the bravery of those who sought to save them, and pray for peace in our time. In the meantime, we will remember them. I will remember then. It was 24 years ago this morning, and I was sitting in the offices of Prudential Securities, Madison Avenue and 60th Street with my partners David and Crossan and Peter and our support staff. I was a junior partner in a wealth management practice I was specializing in church endowments and training so that I could have something to add to the congregations I served in the future in the area of the business of being the church. I had been ordained 3 years earlier and sat in that somewhat awkward seat of a priest on Wall Street. One of our managers called me the sheep among the wolves. I'm not sure it was a compliment. I decided to lean into it. As we watched CNBC and Maria Bartiromo and Kudlow and Kramer and all the gang tell us what we were supposed to be thinking, meanwhile wolfing down our bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches from the cart downstairs, which as the junior guy always seemed to be me that had to go and get them and have them in place by 7:30 a.m. ahead of our 8 o'clock meeting. We were in a great mood because it was a beautiful morning, and with the summer behind us, we were all looking forward to starting out the fall season in all the various organizations we belonged to, one of which was holding a cocktail party in the garden of a member's townhouse on East 84th Street later that evening. And we were speaking about him and his family and how kind he was to host this event. And then someone switched one of the TVs to NBC for a moment, and we saw Katie Couric breaking in with news of a small private plane hitting some building downtown. We didn't break stride in our conversation, but did note that it had happened before. We were trying to remember which floor of the Empire State had been hit, and asked ourselves if any lives had been lost other than the pilot. The conversation immediately went to pre-market action and would this affect anything? So we sent Peter, our trader, directly to the Bloomberg to investigate and see if we needed to do something. And we kept eating our sandwiches. And then the second plane hit. And we all stood up. And we all stopped talking. It was as if we all had the same thought in the same instant. We're under attack. And no one said it. After 5 minutes of watching in silence, the first tower fell. We realized by doing the math that there could be 25,000 dead so far, and the news was speculating about how many planes there could be still to come. And we were not on a low floor. David broke the spell and said, "We need to go now." We went down in the elevator together and stood in front of 650 Madison Avenue. In fact, if it weren't for one of these obscenely tall buildings, you could see it. I could see the green glass of it right behind the GM building. No, to the side of it, right behind the tall building. And we stood there on the pavement right outside 650 Madison and awkwardly and weirdly became huggers in the moment. We mocked ourselves later for this. Wall Street was not a kinder, gentler place in those days. Peter made for Grand Central to get out to Connecticut to be with his family. Crossan, David, and I went north. David peeled off at the Transverse for the west side to be with his family. Crossan and I continued north and east, and he left me at 78th and 1st and continued to 86th and East End to be with his family. I immediately changed clothes from blue pinstripes into black, 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 and white, and jumped on the IRT downtown. A few years earlier, when that plane was downed over Long Island and I watched the wreckage and the people gathered around with no one to help them in their grief, I promised myself that if something like this happens again, I will immediately go and do what I can. So I did. The trains were stopped at Canal Street, and I walked the rest of the way and was immediately stationed at a triage station at Stuyvesant High School. After several hours, we were told, "It doesn't look like there are going to be survivors coming in. You're all dismissed." Most people walked uptown. I walked further down. I knew there were still people around and there was still work to be done, and I'd met up with my seminary friend George, and so we teamed up to see what we could do. We sat across from the North Tower on chairs that had fallen out of the sky and survived, next to mangled office furniture. I won't share the blow-by-blow, but I will offer some moments. One moment, the most poignant moment. I was wearing a surgical mask they'd given us at the triage center. Yet the stench I will never forget, and I will not describe. A fireman covered in caked sweat and ash sat down next to me, and we simply sat there saying nothing for an hour or more. Finally, I dared to break the silence by asking, "Where is your company?" By which I meant Brooklyn, Tribeca, Upper East Side. After a minute, his head raised, and he simply, and this is the image I have in my mind, like Dickens' third spectre, raised his right hand, finger extended, and pointed at the collapsed North Tower. I walked home at 4 a.m., returning at dawn. I woke to the same smell 5 miles north, which was still in the air on All Saints' Day. We will never forget. Those of us who were there and those of us who were alive will always remember. Those are simply facts. What we do with those memories defines who we are. Who are you? Are you someone who sits around and lets the world happen? Lets it become a worse place around you while others cheapen and degrade the very freedoms and privileges we enjoy as citizens of this great republic and sinners of Christ's own redeeming? Or are you a person of action? Are you the very reflection of Jesus Christ, who cleansed the temple of money changers and at the same time broke the cycle of oppression and would not return violence with violence, who would not return sin with sin, but was rather holy love? If you are trying to figure out what that means, you are not alone. The world is not a clearer place 24 years after those planes flew into the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and were downed in Pennsylvania. If anything, it is more confused and confusing. 24 years ago, it was terrorists trying to kill us, and yesterday, Charlie Kirk was killed, most likely by one of his fellow countrymen. At this point, we don't know. What we do know is he was killed needlessly, senselessly, and most likely because the person disagreed with what Charlie was saying. If you are trying to figure out what that all means, and want to be part of a community that seeks and serves Christ in all persons, and is all about joining together in our journey of faith, absent of the petty politics of the day, join us on 28 September at 5 p.m. at the Church of St. Michael and St. George, 344 East 69th Street, as we launch this new congregation where we can ask those questions together and seek those answers, as we engage eternal truths and worship according to Liturgy of the Ages in the Anglican tradition. If you cannot make it in person, join us by Zoom and watch this space for other opportunities for fellowship, education, and conversation during the week. May God bless you this day and always.